Talking about race is difficult for everyone, for teachers, students, and writers, for politicians, journalists, bloggers, and others. Why is this so? Many people avoid discussions of race because they don't want to offend anyone. Further compounding the difficulty is that conversations about race often include a number of other terms, such as ethnicity, culture, or heritage, whose meaning and usage can vary by nation, time period, and region, even within communities or families. This video will help prepare you to analyze or read race in U.S. literature and other media. You will sometimes hear people say that race is a social construction. But what does that really mean? Skin pigmentation is one product of an almost infinite number of slight genetic differences that are possible among people. Any scientist will tell you that at a biological level, skin color is trivial, as are many other observable characteristics such as eye shape and hair texture. But when we read biological features as markers of a racial identity, we assign them all kinds of social and cultural meanings involving, for instance, natural abilities, intelligence, or moral values. It is this process, which scholars sometimes refer to as racialization, that writer Mark Twain had in mind when he referred to race as a fiction of law and custom. If race is a fiction, however, it is a fiction with considerable power to shape people's lives. Harlem Renaissance writer Zora Neale Hurston wrote in 1928, "I remember the very day that I became colored." Having grown up in Eatonville, Florida, an all-black town, she experienced a sea change in her racial identity when she was sent to school in Jacksonville.
I was not Zora of Orange County anymore. I was now a little colored girl. I found it out in certain ways, in my heart as well as in the mirror. I became a fast brown, warranted not to rub nor run.
Literature and other media have always played a significant role in how Americans perceive and think about race and racial stereotypes. For example, here's how James Fenimore Cooper's 1826 novel, The Last of the Mohicans, describes an early 19th century white view of Native Americans.
The alarmed colonists believed that the yells of the savages mingled with every fitful gust of wind that issued from the interminable forests of the West. The terrific character of their merciless enemies increased immeasurably the natural horrors of warfare. Numberless recent massacres were still vivid in their recollections, in which the natives of the forests were the principal and barbarous actors.
The stereotypes and other ideas about race disseminated by literature and media can gradually come to appear natural or normal to us, producing what scholars refer to as a stereotype that has become naturalized. For example, the supposed savagery of indigenous people became a common refrain in U.S. literature and media. As the stereotype became naturalized, it influenced the practice of naming military weapons after Native American tribal nations. But authors also challenge and subvert these stereotypes. One way is through parody. In her short story, My Father's Chinese Wives, Sandra Sing Low treats a white man's adherence to a common stereotype of Asian women as exotic and submissive sexual objects, with contempt, but also with humor. In the narrator's writing group, a member named Fred imagines himself as a
wealthy, Caucasian, 60-something-year-old urologist who goes on sabbatical for a year to Japan. There he finds unexpected love in the form of a 23-year-old Japanese medical student named Aku, who smells of cherry blossoms. But there's one line I've never been able to block from my mind. I put my hand in hers, and her little fingers opened, like the petals of a moist flower.
At other times, race can function in literature as a means of asserting individual or communal identity, sometimes for both cultural and political purposes. English professor Domino Perez describes her experience reading Rudolfo Anaya's Bless Me Ultima, the first book she encountered by a Mexican-American author about Mexican-Americans.
Suddenly, my relationship or my approach to literature was no longer intellectual. It felt highly personalized.
Authors such as Ana Castillo also create new reading experiences for students.
So when I teach Ana Castillo's novel, So Far From God, on the very first day, we spend quite a bit of time talking about the chapter titles. Inevitably, a student will say, well, these sound like titles of telenovelas. Immediately, just by looking at the chapters, they have a powerful connection that is a connection that is born of family, of culture, of community. Maybe they grew up sitting around the television, everybody watching a same telenovela, and then drawing on that experience to help them read literature in the classroom and feeling empowered by that observation.
Authors may also use literature to give historically silenced communities a public voice or to correct misperceptions about them. Oscar Caceres reflects on a student's question about his collection of short stories set in the border town of Brownsville, Texas.
A student asking me during the Q&A, I kind of like these stories and everything, but I'm curious why, there are no drug dealers. And I said, well, I don't have any drug dealers in my family. I'm sorry. But the idea that I would have that token drug dealer in my literature simply because that's what they knew. They were so accustomed to seeing those images. Again, it's not that they don't exist, but I think there's a much broader experience.
Racial representations can be complicated. It's not always easy to tell if an author is perpetuating or challenging a particular belief about race. For example, what do we make of the popular television show South Park naming one of its few black characters Token? Is the show calling attention to and criticizing the racial tokenism prevalent in Hollywood, or, given South Park's own paucity of black characters, is it participating in that tokenism without really trying to make a difference? In a similar vein, critics have argued passionately about Mark Twain's repetitive use of the N-word in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, as well as about the book's depiction of Jim, a runaway slave who journeys with Huck down the Mississippi River on a wooden raft. It is at this point that our work as literary critics really begins, and where the skill of close reading, discussed in another video in this series, can become especially important. As we hope has become clear, race is a category both of belonging and of difference. Race can be a tool of oppression, but it can also provide people with a sense of empowerment. Analyzing race in literature requires more than stereotype hunting or dividing positive from negative images. It requires careful attention to both text and context, and to how they work together to produce literary and cultural meanings. As Pulitzer Prize-winning fiction writer Junot Diaz has said, if race or gender or any other important social force are not part of your interpretive logic, if they're not part of what you consider the real, then you're leaving out most of what has made our world, our world.